say there are two different types of evidence. One is scientific evidence, and the other deals with moral evidence. Let's go to the scientific evidence. Why do we believe that there is a beginning even? I mean, Genesis tells us that in the beginning there was the heaven and the earth. So obviously we know from the Bible that there is a beginning, but not everyone believes that. And that's part of the battle ongoing between atheists and Christians, is that atheists do not believe the world had a beginning. But evidence has told us, even now in modern times, the findings in science are consistent with that of a beginning point. We go to the second law of thermodynamics, which says that the universe is a finite universe and that the world is running down and will eventually reach what scientists call heat death. In other words, it will run out of energy. Well, for a universe to run out of energy, it has to have a limited amount. For it to have a limited amount, it can't be infinite. So it had to have had a beginning. Now, what's that beginning? That's another question. But the fact is that science even confirms there's a beginning. And then you also have the Big Bang Theory, which says that there was a beginning point, a starting point.
You know, typically when we try to defend, and using the word again for apologetics, when we try to defend our view of creation and our view of evolution, we tend to quickly go to Genesis and talk about God's creative force. And I've found a clear, for me, apologetic comes from Hebrews 11, where it talks about from the very foundation of the world, we believe by faith that God spoke it into being. And I know many times the argument is, well, who created God? That's where we have to clearly defend our faith by saying, by faith, I believe that God was before anything was. And in His creative power, He spoke life into being. And He was the first creative force in this world. Clearly because it's spoken of in Hebrews. And that becomes the authority by which I believe it. Because God's Word states it clearly there. When a person is struggling over the reality of whether the God exists or not, I think creation truly is the strongest point that we have to convince someone that there is a God. When you think about just our human bodies and how they act in accordance with what they are, when you cut your hand, there is something internal within your system that causes white blood cells to go and attack that, and antibodies and all those things that are happening within our body. And for us to fathom that thing happened sort of accidentally, or that we evolved out of the water of the ocean and crawled up onto the shore, and those kind of things just sort of evolved into some natural state, is, to me, selling short and making their own stance laughable. So all of creation cries out for the glory of God.
In one of Peter's writings, Peter says that 1,000 days is as a day with the Lord, and a day with the Lord is as 1,000 days. When scientists began dealing with Einstein's theory of relativity, they found that indeed a man who left the Earth and traveled at the speed of light out in space and returned back to the Earth after one day would have aged only one day. Whereas, according to the theory of relativity, humankind on the Earth would have aged 1,000 years. So there are some astounding things, not only related to science, but related to the way that man grows and develops and understands himself, that are to be found in the Bible.
I believe in creation. Evolution is obviously a lie.
Why?
Well, because God's hand is just evident in everything. You just can't say that order has come from disorder. I mean, that in itself goes against the laws of thermodynamics, as far as even scientists of the world believe. So order cannot come from disorder.
In discussing the area of dinosaurs, I think that you have to begin by realizing that both the Bible and history or paleontology, archaeology, tell a similar story in the fact that dinosaurs existed. In the book of Genesis, it says that there were the great sea monsters. and that these sea monsters were part of God's specific creation. It was on maybe the fourth day or something like that. These are probably a reference to what we tend to call dinosaurs today. In the theory of evolution, it says that these dinosaurs existed perhaps 100 or more million years ago, and that they died out about 60 million years ago. There are a lot of questions that have been raised in recent years about this situation, though. For instance, they found in Texas the footprint of a dinosaur with a human footprint, a normal, typical human footprint, right in the midst of it. Something that could have only happened within hours of one another. Something that isn't too commonly known is that as recently as about 500 years ago, there was a recorded human sighting of a pterodactyl. There are persistent reports coming out of the deepest part of Africa from people that couldn't know one another that have occurred over the last 50 years that describe some massive animal or reptile or something which fits the description of a brontosaur. In the book of Job, it talks about the behemoth. The normal way in which the Bible translates that, and what Hebrew refers to as a behemoth today, is a hippopotamus. But if you read the description of that particular creature, it better fits a brontosaur than it does any other creature that we know of today. So it's very possible that evolution or theories of dinosaurs that existed hundreds of years, millions of years before humans were on the earth is just plain wrong. The Loch Ness Monster is another example of a possible dinosaur that is still alive. The ichthyosaur, which is kind of a shark-like creature, is known to exist today, in fact. They have caught some off the coast of Africa. And yet this is a creature that was, until sometime in this century, known only through paleontology. So dinosaurs and their existence today is not a cut and dried, open and shut case of whether they died out or not. I think the second thing that needs to be said is that dinosaurs are commonly agreed to be either reptiles or birds or something on that order. And when you look at what God told Noah to take into the ark, Noah was told to take two of essentially what we would call the mammals into the ark. And the dinosaurs just don't fit into that category. Another aspect of the whole ark story is that while it's challenged and it's questioned, and some people look for Noah's ark up on Mount Ararat, and others say, no, there's nothing up there, and there are questions as to whether there are evidences geologically for a worldwide flood. At the same time, there is a very real possibility that the whole story of Noah's Ark could be associated with the Ice Ages, which are oftentimes cited as one of the main reasons why the dinosaurs in fact died out. So if, for instance, the worldwide temperature was perhaps 3 or 4 or 5 degrees warmer than that which is usually presumed during the time of the Ice Ages, it's entirely possible that a global flood, rather than global ice ages, could have occurred. So as a result, there are different reasons that could be given, different explanations that could be provided to answer the question of what happened to the dinosaurs. And were they really that many centuries and millennia and hundreds of millions of years old? Or are they somewhat more contemporary than we really admit at this time?